A millionaire found an abandoned boy on the highway and took him to his home. Arriving home early, he could not believe what he saw the boy was capable of doing. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its resonant chimes echoing through the Harrison mansion's empty halls. Nathan Williams, just 13, jolted awake in his bed, his heart pounding against his ribs. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as if weighted with an impending tragedy. With trembling fingers, he pushed aside his blanket and stepped onto the cold hardwood floor. The moonlight filtering through his window cast elongated shadows that seemed to reach for him like ghostly hands. The usual creaks and settling sounds of the old house were absent, replaced by an unnatural silence that made every hair on his body stand on end. "Dad," he called out softly, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. Following an instinct he couldn't explain, Nathan made his way down the dark corridor toward his father's study. The door was slightly ajar, a thin beam of lamplight spilling onto the hallway carpet. As he pushed the door open, the scene before him froze the blood in his veins. His father, Michael Williams, lay motionless on the floor beside his desk chair. His reading glasses had fallen a few feet away, and an empty glass lay shattered near his outstretched hand. "Dad. Dad, wake up!" Nathan rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside his father's body. He shook him desperately, but Michael's skin was cold to the touch, his eyes staring vacantly at the ceiling. "Please, Dad, please wake up." The sound of hurried footsteps made Nathan look up. Marcus, his best friend who had been staying over that night, stood in the doorway. But instead of rushing to help, Marcus's face twisted into an expression Nathan had never seen before, a mixture of horror and accusation. You killed him, didn't you?" Marcus's voice trembled. "Everyone knows about your fights with him. Everyone knows." "No, I didn't. I would never." Nathan's words caught in his throat as Marcus backed away. "I'm calling the police," Marcus declared, his voice rising. "They need to know what you did to your own father." Nathan remained frozen beside his father's body, his world crumbling around him. In the space of a few minutes, he had lost not only his father but also his best friend's trust. As Marcus's footsteps retreated down the hallway, Nathan could already hear the whispers of accusation that would soon grow into shouts of condemnation. The night that had started with an inexplicable feeling of wrongness had become the beginning of a nightmare that would change his life forever. As this story touches the depths of human emotion and injustice, if you find yourself moved by Nathan's tragic beginning, consider subscribing to our channel. Each subscription fuels our passion to bring you more compelling stories that reach into the heart of human experience. Before tragedy struck, Nathan's life with his father Michael Williams had been a tapestry of love, learning, and simple joys. Their modest two-story house on Maple Street wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with warmth that money couldn't buy. Michael, a dedicated high school literature teacher, had raised Nathan alone since his wife's disappearance shortly after Nathan's birth. Every morning began the same way. Michael would wake early to prepare breakfast, filling their small kitchen with the aroma of fresh coffee and pancakes. Nathan would stumble downstairs, still half asleep, to find his father humming old Beatles songs while flipping pancakes. "Good morning, champion," Michael would say, his eyes crinkling with genuine joy at the sight of his son. Their weekday routine was simple but meaningful. Michael would drive Nathan to school in their aging blue Honda, using the 15-minute journey to discuss everything from classic literature to Nathan's dreams. "Knowledge isn't just about facts," Michael often said. "It's about understanding the human heart." Those car rides became Nathan's favorite classroom, where his father's wisdom shaped his young mind. Weekends were their special time. They would spend Saturday mornings at the local library, where Michael would help Nathan discover new worlds through books. In the afternoons, they'd play basketball in their driveway, Michael teaching Nathan not just about the game, but about persistence and grace in both victory and defeat. Sunday evenings were reserved for their tradition of cooking dinner together, often ending in laughter over failed culinary experiments. Michael's dedication to education extended beyond his own classroom. Despite their modest means, he tutored struggling students for free after school. "Everyone deserves a chance to learn," he'd tell Nathan. "Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them." Nathan would often sit in during these sessions, watching his father transform lives with patience and understanding. Their financial situation wasn't always stable. Michael had taken out a loan to cover medical bills from Nathan's childhood asthma, and the payments were a constant strain. Yet he never let their monetary struggles dim the light in their home. When Nathan worried about the bills he'd sometimes see on the kitchen table, Michael would simply smile and say, "We have each other, and that makes us richer than any banker." The bond between father and son grew stronger through their shared love of music. Michael had taught Nathan to play guitar on his old acoustic, a cherished possession from his college days. Their evening jam sessions, though far from perfect, filled their home with joy and laughter. Michael would often say, "Music isn't about hitting the right notes, it's about touching the right hearts." Even in difficult times, Michael maintained his integrity and compassion. When Nathan was bullied in 6th grade, Michael taught him not to respond with anger, but with understanding. Hurt people, he explained, helping Nathan see beyond the surface of human behavior. This lesson would later become painfully relevant in ways neither could have imagined. Their last summer together had been particularly special. Michael had saved enough to take Nathan camping in the mountains. Under the stars, they'd talked about life, dreams, and the future. "You have a beautiful heart," Michael had said, his voice soft in the darkness. "Promise me you'll never let the world harden it," Nathan had promised, not knowing how soon and severely that promise would be tested. These memories would become both a comfort and a torment for Nathan, a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he fought to honor. His father had built a foundation of love, wisdom, and integrity that would be tested in ways they never imagined, but would ultimately prove unshakable. Richard Harrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his reflection a stark figure against the city skyline. At 45, he embodied success: impeccably tailored suits, commanding presence, and the calculated confidence that came from decades of winning. As CEO of Harrison Investments, he had built an empire that his father Gregory had started, though the foundation of their wealth remained shrouded in whispers and speculation. The Harrison name commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Their modernist mansion on the city's outskirts stood as a testament to their power, its stark architecture a physical manifestation of the family's unyielding nature. Richard's daily routine was a masterclass in precision: every gesture, every word, every decision carefully measured for maximum impact. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a man haunted by his own legacy. In his private moments, when the office emptied and the night pressed against his windows, Richard would loosen his tie and pour himself a glass of single malt scotch, wrestling with the weight of secrets he'd inherited along with his fortune. His father Gregory's methods of building their wealth had always troubled him, but he'd learned early to bury his doubts beneath layers of rationalization. The Harrison business model was simple but brutal: identify desperate people, offer them loans at seemingly reasonable rates, then watch as the interest compounds until they're drowning in debt. When they couldn't pay, Gregory's collectors would ensure they understood the consequences. Richard had witnessed this cycle countless times, each instance adding another crack to his carefully maintained facade. His relationship with Gregory was complex, built on a foundation of fear, respect, and unspoken resentment. Weekly dinners at the family mansion were exercises in tension, where conversations about business inevitably led to subtle reminders of Richard's obligations to maintain the family legacy. "Power isn't given," son Gregory would say, swirling his brandy. "It's taken and held with both hands until your knuckles turn white." The only warmth in Richard's life came from Sarah Thompson, his housekeeper of 15 years. She moved through his home like a ghost, maintaining order with quiet efficiency, occasionally offering a gentle word or concerned glance that suggested she saw beyond his carefully constructed walls. Her presence was both a comfort and a reminder of the simple human connections he'd sacrificed for success. Richard's office held a secret, a hidden safe behind an abstract painting containing documents that could unravel the Harrison empire. Late at night, he would sometimes open it, reviewing the evidence of his father's ruthless business practices, telling himself he kept them as insurance while knowing they were really a testament to his own suppressed conscience. His mornings began with a ritual, adjusting his tie in the mirror, smoothing his suit jacket, practicing the smile that never quite reached his eyes. Each gesture was a piece of armor, protecting him from the growing realization that he had become a participant in his father's cruel legacy. The weight of this knowledge showed in the slight tremor of his hands when he was alone, in the sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling of his immaculate bedroom. Despite his wealth and power, Richard found himself increasingly isolated. His marriage had ended years ago, his wife unable to bear the coldness that had seeped into their relationship. Friends were really business associates, each interaction measured in terms of advantage and leverage. But the Harrison name opened doors but built walls, leaving him in a prison of privilege. As he moved through his world of board meetings and charity galas, Richard maintained the image expected of him, but a storm was brewing beneath the surface. The question that haunted him grew louder with each passing day. How long could he continue to be his father's son before the cost became too high to bear? The friendship between Nathan and Marcus Williams had begun in 3rd grade, when Marcus defended Nathan from bullies during recess. Their bond, forged in that playground moment, grew into something that seemed unbreakable. Marcus was everything Nathan wasn't: outgoing, athletic, and naturally popular. Yet he chose to spend most of his time with the quieter, more thoughtful Nathan. Their afternoons were spent in Nathan's basement, where they'd created their own world. Marcus would bring his PlayStation, and they'd spend hours racing virtual cars or battling digital dragons. During these gaming sessions, they'd share their deepest secrets and dreams. Marcus talked about becoming a professional athlete, while Nathan shared his hopes of following in his father's footsteps as a teacher. Michael Williams had welcomed Marcus as a second son, understanding the importance of this friendship to Nathan. He'd make them his famous grilled cheese sandwiches, listen to their excited chatter about school events, and offer advice when they faced challenges. Marcus, whose own parents were often absent due to their demanding jobs, found a father figure in Michael that he desperately needed. The boys had developed their own language of inside jokes and shared memories. They had secret nicknames for teachers, a special handshake that took 2 minutes to complete, and countless stories that would send them into fits of laughter with just a single reference. Their friendship seemed destined to last forever, making Marcus's betrayal all the more devastating. What Nathan didn't know was that Marcus had been struggling with his own demons. His parents' mounting debt to the Harrison family had placed immense pressure on him. Gregory Harrison's subtle threats against his family had wormed their way into Marcus's young mind, poisoning even his strongest loyalties. The weight of this pressure would eventually break their friendship in the most tragic way possible. In the weeks before Michael's death, subtle changes had appeared in their relationship. Marcus became more distant, often canceling their gaming sessions with vague excuses. Nathan noticed his friend's forced smiles and distracted responses, but attributed them to the stress of upcoming school competitions. He couldn't have known that Marcus was being groomed by Gregory Harrison's people, slowly being turned against his best friend. Their shared love of music had been another cornerstone of their friendship. Marcus would bring his drums to jam with Nathan on guitar, creating what they jokingly called the worst garage band in history. These impromptu concerts, with Michael as their only audience, were some of their happiest moments together. The memory of these sessions would later haunt Nathan, becoming a bitter reminder of everything he had lost. The night of Michael's death, Marcus had stayed over specifically because Gregory Harrison had arranged it, though Nathan wouldn't learn this truth until much later. The sleepover, once a symbol of their friendship, became the setting for the ultimate betrayal. Marcus's accusation in that moment of tragedy wasn't just the loss of a friend, it was the shattering of Nathan's entire support system. The morning after Michael's death, Nathan's world transformed into a nightmare of accusation and cruelty. News spread through their small town like wildfire, each retelling adding darker details to the story. By sunrise, the peaceful neighborhood he'd known his entire life had become hostile territory, with formerly friendly faces now twisted in suspicion and disgust. Mrs. Anderson, who had brought them cookies every Christmas, now hurriedly pulled her grandchildren inside when Nathan walked past. Mr. Thompson, the kindly grocer who used to slip extra candy into their shopping bags, refused to serve him, loudly declaring he wouldn't sell to murderers. The whispers followed him everywhere, growing louder with each passing day. At school, the isolation was complete and deliberate. His classmates cleared hallways when he approached, treating him like a contamination they feared might spread. Notes appeared in his locker, cruel messages calling him a monster, a killer, a disgrace. Teachers who had once praised his intelligence now regarded him with cold suspicion, their eyes following his every move as if expecting violence. The basketball court where he and his father had spent countless happy hours became a place of torment. A group of older boys cornered him there one afternoon, their leader, Tommy Parker, shoving him against the chain link fence. "How does it feel to kill your own father?" Tommy had sneered, while others recorded the confrontation on their phones. The videos spread across social media, accompanied by hateful comments and calls for justice. Even church, once a sanctuary of peace, became unbearable. During Sunday service, the congregation physically shifted away from him, leaving an empty circle of pews around him. The pastor's sermon about honoring one's parents felt pointed and accusatory, with dozens of eyes boring into Nathan's back. After the service, mothers clutched their children closer as he passed as if his presence alone might corrupt their innocence. The local diner, where he and his father had shared countless Sunday breakfasts, became the scene of public humiliation. When Nathan tried to order food, the waitress who had known him since he was a toddler loudly announced she wouldn't serve someone with blood on their hands. Other customers joined in, throwing napkins and food at him until he fled, the sound of their cruel laughter echoing in his ears. Local businesses posted his picture in their windows with warnings not to serve him. The library, his father's favorite place, banned him from entry. The park where he used to read became forbidden territory, with parents calling their children away whenever he appeared. The community had effectively quarantined him, creating invisible barriers that grew stronger each day. Most painful were the defacements of his father's memorial. The simple wooden cross placed where Michael had taught his last class was repeatedly vandalized with hateful messages. Fresh flowers Nathan brought were trampled, replaced with signs demanding justice. Even in death, they wouldn't let his father rest in peace, using his memory as a weapon against his son. The police investigation seemed perfunctory at best. Detective Roberts, who had once praised Michael's teaching, now treated Nathan like a hardened criminal during questioning. The local newspaper painted him as a troubled teen with a history of arguments with his father, conveniently forgetting the years of visible love and respect between them. Nights became a torment of broken windows, spray-painted threats on their garage door, and anonymous phone calls filled with heavy breathing and whispered threats. The house that had once been filled with music and laughter became a prison, its walls offering little protection against the community's collective hatred. The cruelest cut came from his teachers, the very colleagues who had worked alongside his father for years. They now refused to call on him in class, grade his assignments, or acknowledge his raised hand. Mr. Peterson, his father's best friend in the English department, publicly returned Nathan's essay with a large red F and the words "like father," like son scrawled across the top. The day Nathan left his home wasn't a choice, but a desperate escape. With no money and nowhere to go, he found himself wandering the city streets, carrying only a small backpack containing his father's worn leather wallet, a faded family photo, and a change of clothes. The urban landscape, once familiar and safe, transformed into a maze of survival challenges. His first night was spent huddled in the doorway of an abandoned shop, jumping at every shadow and sound. The concrete was hard and cold, a far cry from his warm bed at home. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the harsh reality of his new existence. By morning, his joints ached, and his stomach growled with a hunger he'd never known before. Finding food became a daily struggle. He learned to time his visits to bakeries just before closing, hoping for discarded day-old bread. Some days he went without eating entirely. The local soup kitchen offered temporary relief, but even there, whispers of the boy who killed his father followed him, forcing him to leave before finishing his meals. The weather became his constant enemy. Rain soaked through his clothes, leaving him shivering for hours. During one particularly brutal downpour, he sought shelter under a bridge, only to be chased away by other homeless people who had claimed the space. Their faces, hard with their own struggles, showed no sympathy for a 13-year-old boy. His appearance began to change dramatically. His clothes, once neat and clean, became dirty and torn. His hair, which his father used to ruffle affectionately every morning, grew matted and unkempt. The reflection he caught in store windows showed a stranger a gaunt, haunted face that barely resembled the boy he used to be. The city's dangers became increasingly apparent. One night, a group of drunk men spotted him sleeping in an alley. They approached with malicious intent, recognizing him from the news. Nathan ran until his lungs burned, finally hiding in a dumpster until dawn. The incident taught him to stay constantly alert, to trust no one, to sleep with one eye open. His father's old watch, a cherished birthday gift, was stolen while he dozed in a park. The theft hurt more than any physical pain. It was like losing a piece of his father all over again. He cried that night, not for the watch itself, but for the memory of his father's proud smile as he'd fastened it around Nathan's wrist. The worst part wasn't the physical hardship, but the crushing loneliness. He watched families through restaurant windows, seeing children his age laughing with their parents, and the pain of loss would hit him anew. Sometimes he'd find himself talking to his father's photo, asking for guidance, for strength, for forgiveness, though he knew he'd done nothing wrong. He tried looking for work, but no one would hire a 13-year-old, especially one they recognized as that murderer's son. One kindly restaurant owner, who initially offered him dishwashing work, retracted the offer after customers threatened to boycott. Nathan left with his head down, another door closed, another hope extinguished. The public library became his only refuge during operating hours. There, among the books his father had loved so much, he could almost pretend things were normal. He'd read for hours, losing himself in stories of triumph over adversity, though each day it became harder to believe in happy endings. The streets taught him harsh lessons about humanity. He witnessed drug deals, fights, and desperation in all its forms. Yet occasionally there were glimpses of kindness, a homeless veteran sharing his blanket during a cold night, a street vendor secretly slipping him a hot dog, a librarian pretending not to notice him sleeping in the reading corner. It happened on a particularly cold autumn evening. Nathan, exhausted and hungry, was huddled in a doorway when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Through the haze of fatigue, he watched as a tall figure emerged, Richard Harrison, dressed in an immaculate suit that probably cost more than his father had made in months. Richard had been driving home from another tense dinner with his father when he spotted the boy. Something about Nathan's hunched form struck a chord deep within him. Perhaps it was the way the streetlight caught the boy's face, revealing features too young for such suffering. Or maybe it was the book clutched to his chest, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, one of Michael Williams' favorite novels. "Are you hungry?" Richard's voice cut through the evening air, gentle yet commanding. Nathan looked up, startled by the direct address. Most people either ignored him or hurled abuse. This simple question, asked without judgment or accusation, nearly broke him. When was the last time someone had spoken to him as a human being? The interior of Richard's car was warm, the leather seats more comfortable than anything Nathan had felt in weeks. As they drove to a nearby diner, Richard noticed how the boy's eyes darted constantly, looking for threats. Escape roots the instincts of someone who'd learned to expect the worst from others. At the diner, the waitress initially refused to serve them, recognizing Nathan. Richard's quiet authority changed her mind. The boy will have whatever he wants, he stated, his tone brooking no argument. Nathan ordered cautiously at first, but Richard's encouraging nod led to a proper meal, the first in what felt like forever. As Nathan ate, Richard observed him silently. He saw beyond the dirt and worn clothes to something familiar, a reflection of his own younger self, perhaps, before the Harrison legacy had hardened him. The boy's manners, even in his desperate state, spoke of good upbringing. His quiet thank you to the waitress revealed character that hardship hadn't erased. "I have a proposition for you," Richard said finally, waiting until Nathan had finished eating. "My house is too big for one person. You need a safe place to stay. Perhaps we can help each other." The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and unspoken questions. Nathan hesitated. Years of his father's warnings about strangers warring with desperate need. But something in Richard's eyes, a mixture of kindness and his own kind of loneliness, made him consider. "Why would you help me?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Richard's answer was careful, measured, because sometimes the world gets things wrong, and someone needs to make them right. He didn't mention the growing unease about his father's business practices, or the nagging feeling that he was somehow connected to this boy's tragedy. The drive to Harrison Mansion was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they passed through the ornate gates, Nathan couldn't help but compare this imposing structure to his modest home with his father. The marble floors and crystal chandeliers seemed from another world entirely. Sarah Thompson, Richard's housekeeper, was waiting at the door. Her eyes softened at the sight of Nathan, and without a word she disappeared to prepare a room and a hot bath. Her quiet efficiency spoke of years of understanding her employer's unexpected decisions. "This isn't charity," Richard explained as he showed Nathan to what would be his room. "It's a chance for both of us." He didn't elaborate on what he meant, but the weight in his words suggested deeper currents beneath this act of kindness. That night, lying in a clean bed for the first time in weeks, Nathan felt tears sliding down his cheeks. The day's events seemed surreal, a plot twist too convenient to be true. Yet the soft sheets were real, the warm room was real, and for the first time since his father's death, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Nathan's integration into the Harrison household began cautiously, like a wild animal gradually learning to trust. Richard established a routine immediately, understanding that structure was crucial for a boy who had lost everything familiar. Breakfast was served promptly at 7, with Sarah ensuring both Richard and Nathan had proper meals before starting their days. The first challenge was clothing. Richard arranged for a discreet shopping trip, hiring a personal shopper to bring selections to the house, sparing Nathan the judgmental stares of retail stores. The boy's initial reluctance to accept such luxury was evident in his tense shoulders and mumbled thanks, but Richard insisted proper clothing isn't vanity, it's armor against the world's assumptions. School was a more complex issue. Richard hired private tutors, transforming the mansion's library into a classroom. M.S. Reynolds, a retired teacher with kind eyes and infinite patience, was particularly skilled at drawing Nathan out of his shell. During lessons, Richard would sometimes pause in the doorway, watching the boy gradually rediscover his love of learning. The nightmares were the hardest part. Nathan's screams would echo through the mansion's halls, bringing both Richard and Sarah running. They developed an unspoken system. Sarah would prepare hot chocolate, while Richard sat with Nathan, not speaking, just being present until the terror subsided. These quiet midnight moments formed the foundation of their growing trust. Physical changes in Nathan became apparent within weeks. Regular meals and rest restored health to his face, though shadows still lingered in his eyes. His posture straightened, no longer curved protectively inward. Sarah noticed him beginning to make eye contact again, small victories in his recovery that she quietly celebrated. Richard found himself adapting his own routines. Business calls were moved to accommodate Nathan's tutorial schedule. Board meetings were shortened so he could return home for dinner. His father Gregory's increasingly demanding messages went unanswered as Richard prioritized his new responsibility. But the mansion, once merely a showcase of wealth, began to feel like a home. The most significant transformation occurred in the mansion's music room. Discovering Nathan's musical background, Richard had his father's old grand piano tuned. The first time Nathan's fingers touched the keys, playing a halting version of a song his father had taught him, Richard witnessed something powerful: the boy's grief, finding voice through music. Their evenings developed a comfortable pattern. After dinner they would retire to the library, each absorbed in their own reading but sharing the space companionably. Richard found himself selecting books from his collection to share with Nathan, remembering his own discoveries at that age. These quiet hours became sacred, protected from the outside world's intrusions. Sarah watched this unlikely family form with quiet satisfaction. She observed how Richard's sharp business manner softened around Nathan, how the boy's presence seemed to fill a void neither had acknowledged. Her maternal instincts, long suppressed in service to the Harrison household, found new purpose in caring for them both. Yet beneath this developing peace lay currents of unresolved questions. Nathan still flinched at unexpected sounds, his trauma far from healed. Richard's phone would sometimes ring late at night, his father's name flashing on the screen, bringing tension to his jaw. The outside world's judgment hadn't disappeared, it merely waited beyond the mansion's gates. The discovery came by accident. Nathan was helping Sarah organize the mansion's vast attic when he stumbled upon an old leather briefcase, its brass latches tarnished with age. Inside, yellowed photographs and documents told a story that would shatter the fragile peace they had built. The first photograph showed a younger Gregory Harrison standing with a group of men outside a warehouse. Their expressions were hard, businesslike, but something in their stance suggested menace. The names were scribbled on the back in faded ink, including one that made Nathan's blood run cold: Michael Williams' debt restructuring meeting. Deeper in the briefcase, Nathan found loan documents with his father's signature. The terms were predatory interest rates that would be impossible to repay on a teacher's salary. Margin notes in Gregory's handwriting detailed collection methods and pressure points. One note specifically mentioned Nathan's son's potential leverage if necessary. His hands trembling, Nathan uncovered more evidence of the connection between his father and the Harrisons. Bank statements showed massive withdrawals from Michael's account, far more than the original loan amount. There were photographs of his father looking stressed, clearly taken without his knowledge. A series of threatening letters, each more aggressive than the last. The most damning discovery was a small black notebook containing detailed records of accidents arranged for those who couldn't pay. Names were crossed out systematically, each with a date and brief notation. Nathan recognized some of these names, people who had mysteriously left town or suffered unfortunate incidents. His father's name appeared on the final page, unmarked. Sarah found him there, surrounded by the evidence, tears streaming down his face. She knew immediately what he had discovered. She had suspected the connection herself, but had hoped to protect him from this truth. Her attempt to comfort him was interrupted by Richard's voice from the attic stairs. Richard's reaction to the scene was complex: shock at the discovery, shame at his family's involvement, and fear for what this would mean for his relationship with Nathan. The documents confirmed his worst suspicions about his father's business practices, but seeing them through Nathan's eyes made them unbearable. "I can explain," Richard started, but Nathan was already backing away, the photographs clutched in his shaking hands. The trust they had built over weeks seemed to crumble in seconds. The look of betrayal in Nathan's eyes cut deeper than any accusation could have. Amidst the scattered papers, a newspaper clipping caught Richard's eye: a report of Michael Williams' death, ruled as natural causes. But Gregory's handwritten note in the margin told a different story: problem resolved permanently. NW, situation under control. The implications were horrifying. Time seemed to freeze in the dusty attic as the three of them stood among the exposed secrets. Sarah moved protectively toward Nathan, while Richard struggled to find words that could bridge the chasm that had suddenly opened between them. The weight of his family's sins pressed down on him like a physical force. Nathan broke the silence first, his voice barely a whisper. "You knew. All this time you knew the accusation hung in the air, heavy with betrayal." Richard's protest died on his lips as he realized that, from Nathan's perspective, even his kindness now seemed calculated and suspicious. The days following the attic discovery transformed the mansion's atmosphere. Every act of kindness Richard had shown now appeared sinister through Nathan's suspicious eyes. The comfortable routines they had established became tainted with doubt. Each morning at breakfast, Nathan studied Richard's mannerisms, searching for signs of deception. Nathan began noticing parallels between Richard and Gregory's behaviors: the way they adjusted their ties, their precise movements, their controlled tone of voice. These similarities, once overlooked, now seemed like damning evidence. During their evening reading sessions, Nathan found himself watching Richard over the edge of his book, wondering if his guardian's apparent absorption in literature was just another performance. Late at night, Nathan would replay conversations in his mind, analyzing Richard's words for hidden meanings. The phrase "one want to help you" took on new, darker implications. Was this act of taking him in merely an elaborate attempt to monitor him? To ensure he never discovered the truth about his father's death? The questions multiplied like shadows at dusk. His room, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a gilded cage. Nathan discovered that certain phones in the mansion wouldn't dial outside numbers. The security system, previously viewed as protection, now seemed designed to contain rather than safeguard. He noticed that Sarah always seemed to know his location within the house, reporting his movements to Richard with subtle nods and glances. Richard's business calls became objects of intense scrutiny. Nathan would press his ear against the study door, catching fragments of conversations that seemed innocent enough but could carry hidden significance. The names mentioned, the careful pauses, the sudden switches to hushed tones all fed his growing paranoia. Even Sarah's motherly concern took on a suspicious cast. Her constant presence, her gentle inquiries about his plans and activities began to feel less like care and more like surveillance. The hot chocolate she brought during his nightmares, was it really just chocolate? The thought made him feel guilty, but he couldn't shake it. The mansion's many security cameras, which Nathan had barely noticed before, now seemed to follow his every move. He began testing their blind spots, mapping out routes through the house that wouldn't be recorded. The skills he'd learned surviving on the streets came back, but this time they were turned toward evading indoor predators. One afternoon, Nathan overheard a heated phone conversation between Richard and Gregory. Richard's words seemed to defend him. "The boy stays. He's not a threat," but the very phrase "not a threat" implied he had been discussed as one. What plans did they have for him? What were they waiting for? His father's last words began haunting him with new meaning. "Be careful who you trust," Michael had often said. Had he been trying to warn Nathan about the Harrisons? Every memory of his father now carried possible hidden warnings, messages he'd been too young to understand. The final straw came when Nathan discovered his school essays were being copied and sent to someone. He found the duplicates in Richard's office printer. His writing about his father, his feelings about loss and justice, his thoughts about the future, all were being monitored and analyzed. The violation felt complete. Sarah Thompson had lived with secrets for 15 years, carrying them like stones in her heart, while she moved silently through the Harrison mansion. Watching Nathan now, seeing his familiar gestures and expressions, made maintaining her silence increasingly unbearable. Every time he smiled that crooked, hesitant smile, she saw herself at his age, full of dreams before life turned harsh. Her connection to Nathan's story began long before his arrival at the mansion. 16 years ago, she had been young and desperate, working 3 jobs to support her newborn son. When Gregory Harrison offered her a loan, it seemed like salvation. The interest rates were high, but he promised flexibility. She signed the papers with trembling fingers, cradling her baby boy Nathan. The payments quickly became impossible. Gregory's flexibility revealed itself as a cruel trap. He offered her a choice: give up her son for adoption to a family of his choosing, or face consequences that would leave them both homeless. With no options and a heart full of despair, she made the hardest decision of her life. Michael Williams, a kind-hearted teacher who couldn't have children with his wife, became Nathan's father. Sarah secured a position as the Harrisons' housekeeper through Gregory's generosity, though it was really to keep her close and quiet. She watched from afar as Michael raised her son, taking small comfort in knowing Nathan was loved and cared for. Every birthday, every Christmas, she polished the mansion's silver with tears falling silently, imagining the celebrations she was missing. When Michael's wife left shortly after the adoption, Sarah feared for Nathan's well-being. But Michael proved to be an exceptional father, providing the love and stability she'd hoped for her son. She would sometimes see them in town, Nathan holding his father's hand, laughing at some shared joke, and her heart would both soar and break simultaneously. Now, working alongside her son daily, Sarah noticed countless small details that connected them. His way of humming while lost in thought, his habit of rubbing his left thumb when nervous — these were her traits, preserved across years of separation. She longed to reach out, to explain, to beg forgiveness, but fear held her back. Would he hate her for abandoning him? Would the truth destroy the precious memories of the father who had raised him? The hardest moments were during Nathan's nightmares. Standing outside his door, listening to his muffled sobs, every maternal instinct screamed to go to him, to hold him, to finally tell him who she was. Instead, she would prepare his hot chocolate, adding a pinch of cinnamon, just as she had craved during her pregnancy with him. One morning, while serving breakfast, Nathan looked up at her suddenly, his eyes narrowing in thought. "You seem familiar somehow," he said, then shook his head as if to clear it. Sarah's hand trembled so badly she nearly dropped the coffee pot. That fleeting moment of recognition almost broke her resolve to keep silent. Her guilt intensified after the discovery in the attic. She had known about Gregory's involvement in Michael's death, but had been powerless to prevent it. The weight of this knowledge, combined with her secret identity, made every interaction with Nathan feel like walking on broken glass. She watched him struggle with suspicion toward Richard, knowing she held truths that could change everything. Sarah found small ways to mother him from the shadows. She learned his favorite meals and prepared them without being asked. She kept his room stocked with books similar to those Michael had loved. When he was upset, she would leave little things to comfort him: a fresh cookie, a new notebook, small gestures that might have seemed random but were filled with a mother's careful attention. In quiet moments, Sarah would study old photographs of Nathan as a baby, the only tangible remnants of her brief time as his mother. These precious images were hidden in a locket she wore beneath her uniform, close to her heart. Sometimes, late at night, she would take them out and whisper to them all the things she wished she could tell her son. The irony of their situation wasn't lost on her. Here she was, caring for her own child as a servant, watching another tragedy unfold in his life while again being unable to protect him. The Harrison family had taken everything from her: her son, her dignity, and now potentially Nathan's trust in his new home. Yet despite the pain, Sarah saw hope in Nathan's presence in the mansion. Perhaps this was her chance at redemption, an opportunity to finally protect him as she should have done years ago. She began gathering evidence of Gregory's crimes, carefully documenting everything she observed. If the truth about Michael's death came to light, she would be ready to help bring justice, even if it meant never revealing her own connection to Nathan. Richard's relationship with his father had always been a complex dance of power, expectations, and suppressed rebellion. but taking Nathan in had brought their underlying tensions to a breaking point. The weekly dinners at Gregory's mansion, once merely uncomfortable, now crackled with dangerous electricity. During one particularly tense evening, Gregory sat at the head of his massive oak dining table, swirling brandy in a crystal glass, while fixing Richard with his trademark calculating stare. "You're harboring a liability," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "That Williams boy knows too much, sees too much. It's time to end this little charity project of yours." Richard felt his grip tighten on his fork, knuckles whitening. "Nathan stays," he replied, matching his father's calm tone while rage simmered beneath. "He's under my protection now." The word protection hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Richard was challenging his father's authority directly for the first time. Gregory's response was chilling. He pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs of Richard's past indiscretions, evidence of his own involvement in the family's darker dealings. "You're not as clean as you pretend to be, son. Everything you have, everything you are, comes from decisions I made, decisions we made together." The weight of truth in his father's words felt like a noose tightening. Richard had indeed been complicit, had turned a blind eye to the source of his wealth and privilege. Taking in Nathan had forced him to confront his own moral compromises, and he found them wanting. Late-night phone calls between father and son became increasingly hostile. Gregory would alternate between threats and attempts at manipulation, playing on their shared history. "Remember when you needed help with that situation in college? Remember who made it disappear? Everything has a price, Richard, everything." The conflict spread to the boardroom. Gregory began undermining Richard's authority at Harrison Investments, questioning his decisions in front of the board, suggesting that personal issues were clouding his judgment. Long-time business partners started distancing themselves, sensing a shift in the power dynamic. Sarah observed these changes with growing concern. She noticed Richard spending more time in his study, doors locked, often emerging with red-rimmed eyes and a determined set to his jaw. Documents disappeared from Gregory's office, copied and hidden away. Richard was building something, a case, a defense, or perhaps a weapon. The turning point came when Gregory sent men to the mansion, ostensibly for a security check. Richard saw through the ruse immediately. They were there to assess ways to remove Nathan. That night, Richard confronted his father in his study, their voices carrying through the massive house. "You're becoming a liability yourself," Gregory spat, mask of civility finally dropping. "That boy has made you weak. You used to understand how our world works. Power isn't maintained through kindness, Richard. It's kept through fear and consequence." Richard stood his ground, decades of submission finally breaking. "I've seen your consequences, father. I've seen what happened to Michael Williams, to Sarah Thompson, to countless others. It ends now. I'm not you, and I never will be again." Gregory's laugh was hollow, echoing off mahogany panels. "You think you can change what you are? Your hands are as dirty as mine. That mansion you live in, those suits you wear, the respect you command, it's all built on my methods. You can't whitewash your soul by playing savior to one boy." The truth of these words cut deep, but Richard found strength in facing them. "You're right," he admitted. "I can't change the past, but I can choose the future. Nathan stays. And if anything happens to him, anything at all, everything I know about your operations goes public." Their confrontation marked a fundamental shift. Richard began systematically disentangling his finances from his father's, a process that revealed just how deeply intertwined their corrupt empire had become. Each discovery added to his determination to break free, to find redemption through protecting Nathan. Yet even as Richard defied his father, doubt gnawed at him. Nathan's growing suspicion of him was a constant reminder that good intentions might not be enough to overcome a lifetime of moral compromise. The path to redemption, he was learning, was far more complex than simply choosing right over wrong. The investigation into Michael Williams' death began quietly, with Richard hiring private investigator Thomas Carter, a former police detective known for his discretion and determination. Carter worked methodically, piecing together the events leading up to that fateful night, uncovering a trail that grew darker with each revelation. The official police report listed the cause as a sudden heart attack, but Carter's investigation revealed disturbing inconsistencies. The glass found near Michael's body had contained traces of a sophisticated poison, one that mimicked the effects of cardiac arrest. The compound was rare, expensive, and connected to a laboratory with ties to Harrison Investments. Interviews with Michael's colleagues painted a picture of mounting pressure in the weeks before his death. He had been making frantic phone calls during lunch breaks, meeting with mysterious figures after school hours. One teacher recalled overhearing Michael plead with someone, "Please, I just need more time. I have a son to think about." Bank records showed a pattern familiar to those who knew Gregory's methods. Small loans growing exponentially through predatory interest rates, desperate refinancing attempts, and finally, large withdrawals that couldn't be explained by Michael's modest salary. The financial noose had tightened systematically. Carter discovered surveillance footage from a coffee shop near the school, showing Michael meeting with one of Gregory's known collectors 3 days before his death. The conversation appeared heated, with Michael repeatedly shaking his head and gesturing desperately. The collector's expression remained coldly professional throughout. More disturbing was the evidence of Marcus's involvement. Phone records showed multiple calls between Marcus's parents and Gregory Harrison in the week leading up to Michael's death. The boy's sudden sleepover at the Williams house that night hadn't been coincidental. He had been placed there deliberately, a young pawn in Gregory's cruel game. Sarah proved to be an unexpected source of information. She had kept detailed records of conversations overheard in the Harrison mansion, including a cryptic phone call Gregory made the morning after Michael's death. The situation has been resolved. The boy is isolated now. Proceed as planned. The investigation also revealed a broader pattern. Michael wasn't the first person connected to the school to die under mysterious circumstances. 3 years earlier, another teacher who had borrowed from Gregory had supposedly committed suicide. The similarities were too striking to ignore. Carter's most significant discovery came through analyzing Gregory's private calendar. On the night of Michael's death, his trusted associate, James Morton, had blocked out 4 hours for a debt resolution meeting. Morton's expertise wasn't in finance. He was a chemist specializing in untraceable toxins. The evidence painted a damning picture, but proving it legally would be another matter entirely. Gregory had built his empire on plausible deniability, using layers of intermediaries to distance himself from the actual acts. Each piece of evidence was circumstantial on its own, though the pattern was clear to anyone who looked closely. Richard reviewed Carter's findings with growing horror, recognizing his father's methodical approach in every detail. The precision of the plan, the careful manipulation of all involved, the cold efficiency — it was a masterclass in calculated cruelty, executed with the same attention to detail Gregory brought to his legitimate business dealings. As the true circumstances of Michael's death became clear, Richard faced an impossible dilemma. Revealing the truth might bring justice, but it would also shatter Nathan's world again. The boy had built his memories of his father's last moments around a natural death, learning it was murder would reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. The confrontation between father and son erupted on a stormy night in Gregory's study, where decades of dark dealings had been orchestrated behind mahogany doors and leather-bound pretense. Richard arrived unannounced, clutching Carter's investigation file, his usual composed demeanor fractured by the weight of what he now knew. "You had him killed," Richard's voice cut through the room's heavy silence. "You orchestrated every detail of Michael Williams' death, down to placing Marcus in that house to witness the aftermath." Gregory didn't even look up from his desk, continuing to sign documents as if his son had merely commented on the weather. "I had a teacher eliminated who couldn't pay his debts," Gregory replied finally, his tone clinically detached. "Business is business, Richard. You used to understand that." He reached for his signature crystal decanter, pouring himself a measure of scotch with steady hands that had ordered countless eliminations. Richard slammed the investigation file onto the desk, scattering photographs across its polished surface. "Look at them," he demanded. "Look at the evidence of what you've done. Not just to Michael, but to everyone. Sarah Thompson, forced to give up her son. Marcus, a child manipulated into betraying his best friend. How many lives have you destroyed?" Gregory's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Destroyed? I've built an empire. Everything you enjoy, every privilege you've taken for granted, comes from my understanding that weakness cannot be tolerated. Michael Williams was weak. He thought his noble profession and good intentions would save him from reality." Standing up slowly, Gregory moved to the wall of photographs chronicling the Harrison legacy. "You think you're different now because you've taken in his son? Playing savior to ease your conscience," his voice dripped with contempt. "You're still spending my money, living in my world. The blood on my hands stains your manicured fingers too." Richard felt each word like a physical blow, but stood his ground. "You're right," he admitted, surprising his father. "I am complicit. Every luxury I've enjoyed came at someone else's expense. But that ends tonight. I'm going to make this right." Gregory's expression darkened. "By doing what? Exposing our family secrets? Destroying everything I've built? Think carefully, son. Some choices can't be unmade." He reached into his desk drawer, withdrawing a familiar envelope, the same type, that had contained Michael's loan papers. "Nathan's quite attached to you now, isn't he?" Gregory's voice turned silky. "It would be tragic if he discovered certain documents suggesting your direct involvement in his father's death. Imagine his pain, realizing the man he's grown to trust was actually responsible for his loss." Richard felt his hands trembling with rage. "You would destroy a child to maintain control? Your own grandson." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and Gregory's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What did you say?" Gregory's voice was barely a whisper. "Sarah Thompson," Richard pressed on, past the point of caution. "You forced her to give up her son Nathan for adoption. You've known all along he's your grandson, and still you ordered his father's death." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt in the room. Gregory's composure cracked, showing genuine shock for the first time. "Impossible," he breathed, but his eyes darted to the photographs on his desk with new understanding. "The great Gregory Harrison," Richard continued, his voice gaining strength, "so focused on building his empire that he never noticed his own blood right in front of him. And now you've orchestrated the death of the only real father your grandson ever knew." Gregory sank into his chair, the weight of this truth seemingly aging him years in moments. But Richard knew better than to mistake shock for remorse. His father was already calculating, adapting, looking for ways to turn even this revelation to his advantage. "Get out," Gregory ordered, his voice rough. "Get out before I forget you're my son." Richard moved to the door but paused. "You've lost, father, not just your empire but your humanity, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of monster you are." The community's uprising began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Sarah Thompson broke her silence first, sharing her story with local journalist Emma Parker. The article, published on a quiet Sunday morning, sent shockwaves through the town. Harrison Empire, built on stolen lives, a mother's story. Within hours, others began coming forward. Teachers who had witnessed Michael Williams' growing desperation, former borrowers who had lost homes, businesses, and families to Gregory's predatory practices. Even Marcus's parents finally spoke out, revealing how Gregory had manipulated their son into becoming an unwitting accomplice in Michael's death. The local diner became the unofficial headquarters of the resistance. People who had once shunned Nathan now gathered there, sharing stories of their own encounters with the Harrison family's cruelty. Mrs. Anderson, the bakery owner, admitted to losing her first shop to Gregory's loans. Mr. Thompson, the grocer, revealed how his brother had disappeared after failing to meet Gregory's demands. The movement gained momentum when Richard himself held a press conference on the steps of Harrison Investments. "My father built this empire on suffering," he declared, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Today I stand with his victims. Today we say enough." He proceeded to outline a plan to restructure all outstanding loans and establish a victims' compensation fund. Social media exploded with the hashtag #HarrisonVictims. Videos of testimonies went viral, including a powerful clip of Nathan playing his father's favorite song on Richard's piano, interwoven with stories of Michael's impact on his students' lives. The contrast between Michael's gentle legacy and his brutal end galvanized public opinion. The police, long compromised by Gregory's influence, found themselves under intense scrutiny. Anonymous tips flooded their offices, accompanied by documents proving years of willful negligence in investigating Harrison-related deaths. Detective Roberts, who had dismissed Nathan's case, was forced to resign amid allegations of corruption. Local businesses began publicly cutting ties with Harrison Investments. Banks audited their joint ventures with Gregory's empire, discovering irregularities that triggered federal investigations. The town council, once firmly in Gregory's pocket, scheduled emergency meetings to review all Harrison-related contracts. Churches, schools, and community centers opened their doors for victim support meetings. People who had suffered in silence for years found strength in numbers. The same community that had once turned against Nathan now rallied around him as a symbol of resilience against Gregory's tyranny. Former employees of Harrison Investments started speaking out. Secretaries revealed shredded documents they had secretly preserved. Security guards testified about mysterious late-night meetings. Even Gregory's longtime chauffeur provided dashcam footage of suspicious activities. The uprising reached its peak during a town hall meeting where Richard announced his plan to transform Harrison Investments into a community trust. The crowd that had gathered outside the building broke into spontaneous applause when Nathan walked in with Sarah, their reconciliation representing hope for all who had suffered under Gregory's reign. Nathan's breakdown came unexpectedly during a quiet evening at the Harrison mansion. The weight of all revelations, his father's murder, Sarah being his birth mother, Richard's complex role in everything finally crushed through his carefully maintained composure. It began with his hands trembling over the piano keys during his evening practice, a few wrong notes cascading into complete emotional collapse. "I can't breathe," he gasped, stumbling away from the piano. The room seemed to spin around him, memories flooding his mind in overwhelming waves. His father's smile during their last breakfast together. Marcus's betrayal, the community's cruelty. Sarah's tearful confession. Richard's complicated redemption. Everything he thought he knew had been stripped away, leaving him raw and exposed. Sarah found him curled up in the corner of the music room, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know who I am anymore," he sobbed as she approached. "My whole life has been a lie. Everyone has been a lie. Everyone has been lying to me." His voice cracked with the pain of accumulated betrayals. Richard appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of Nathan's distress, but the boy's reaction was violent. "Don't come near me," he shouted, scrambling to his feet. "You're just like him, like Gregory. You watched me suffer in the streets before taking me in. Was that part of the plan too? Was everything just another Harrison game?" The accusations poured out of him like a broken dam. "Did you enjoy watching me trust you? Did you laugh about it with Gregory, how the murdered teacher's son was living under your roof? Was any of it real?" His words were daggers aimed at both Richard and himself, each question revealing the depth of his self-doubt. Sarah tried to reach for him, but Nathan backed away. "And you, my own mother, you watched me grow up from a distance. You saw what they did to Dad, to Michael, and said nothing. You let me believe I was alone in the world." His voice rose to a scream that echoed through the mansion's halls. The physical manifestations of his breakdown were alarming. His breathing became erratic, his whole body shaking. He began picking up objects, books, photographs, sheet music, and hurling them across the room. Each crash seemed to represent another shattered piece of his reality. "Nathan, please," Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We were all trapped in Gregory's web. We all made choices we regret," but her words couldn't reach him through the storm of his emotions. Richard stood silently, accepting each accusation, understanding that Nathan needed to release years of suppressed pain. The boy's anguish was a mirror reflecting the true cost of the Harrison legacy: destroyed lives, broken families, shattered trust. "I see him everywhere," Nathan choked out, his energy finally failing. "Dad, Michael, he's in every room, every memory. But now I don't know if any of those memories are real. Was he protecting me from Gregory? Did he know about Sarah? Was everything in my life just part of some cruel Harrison plot?" His legs gave out, and he slid to the floor, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I just want my dad back. I want my life back. I want to go home and find him alive and have none of this be real." The raw honesty of his plea broke something in both Richard and Sarah. They watched helplessly as Nathan curled into himself, his body racked with sobs. This wasn't just grief, it was the death of innocence, the collapse of an entire worldview. Everything he had believed about himself, his family, and his place in the world had been upended. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his emotional storm, Nathan finally confronted the full scope of his loss and transformation. He wasn't just grieving for his father anymore, he was mourning his own former self, the boy who had lived in a simpler world before Gregory Harrison's shadow fell across his life. Gregory Harrison was found dead in his study on a cold Tuesday morning, seated in his leather chair as if he had merely fallen asleep. His last glass of scotch stood half empty on the desk, important papers scattered beneath his still hands. The official cause would be listed as heart failure, but the circumstances surrounding his death would raise questions that would never be fully answered. The night before, security cameras captured an unusual series of events. Sarah Thompson had delivered his evening meal, as was customary. 2 hours later, Marcus's father was seen entering through the side door, an unexpected visitor at such a late hour. Shortly after midnight, Richard arrived for what appeared to be a heated discussion, though the study's soundproofing kept the details private. Detective Carter, now leading the investigation, noted several peculiarities. The Scotch bottle seal had been broken recently, though Gregory typically opened new bottles only on Sunday evenings. His private safe stood slightly ajar, highly unusual for a man known for his methodical habits. Most tellingly, a photograph of a young Sarah holding baby Nathan lay prominently on his desk, as if he had been studying it in his final moments. The autopsy revealed traces of a familiar compound in his system, the same poison used to kill Michael Williams. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Gregory Harrison had apparently died by the same means he had employed against others. Whether by his own hand or another's remained a mystery that would spark endless speculation. Richard received the news with complex emotions evident on his face. Standing in the study where he had confronted his father just hours before, he noticed small details that spoke volumes. Gregory's pen had been capped. He never capped his pen during work. His jacket was buttoned. He always unbuttoned it. While seated, his reading glasses were folded neatly. He typically left them perched on his nose, even in sleep. The staff reported that Gregory's behavior had changed dramatically in the days following the revelation about Nathan being his grandson. He had spent hours alone in his study, reviewing old photographs and documents. The usually composed businessman had been seen pacing, talking to himself, his legendary control cracking under the weight of his own legacy. Sarah found herself drawn to the scene, though she had no official reason to be there. As she stood in the doorway of the study where she had served Gregory for so many years, she noticed something only she would recognize: the subtle scent of cinnamon in the air, the same spice she had craved during her pregnancy, the same spice she had craved during her pregnancy, the same spice she added to Nathan's hot chocolate. The detail seemed significant, though she couldn't explain why. The revelation came during a quiet moment in the mansion's kitchen, where Sarah had always felt most at peace. Nathan was sitting at the counter, absently stirring a cup of hot chocolate, when he suddenly spoke. "This tastes exactly like the one Dad used to make," he said softly. He said he learned it from someone special. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed down the dish she was drying. The moment she had both dreaded and longed for had arrived unexpectedly. "He learned it from me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I taught him how to make it exactly as I craved it when I was pregnant with you." Nathan's spoon clattered against the counter as he looked up, his eyes widening with understanding. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with 15 years of unspoken truths. Sarah slowly pulled out the locket she always wore beneath her uniform, opening it to reveal a tiny photograph of herself holding a newborn baby him. "Gregory had me trapped," she explained, tears flowing freely now. "The loan, the interest, the threats. I was so young and scared. Michael, he was kind. He promised to love you as his own. And he did, Nathan. He loved you so much more than I deserved." Her words came out in a rush, years of kept secrets finally breaking free. She told him everything about her desperate circumstances as a young single mother, about Gregory's manipulation, about watching from afar as Michael raised her son. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every first day of school I was there, in the shadows, watching you grow. The hardest part wasn't giving you up, it was seeing you every day and not being able to hold you." Nathan sat motionless, his hot chocolate growing cold. "The cinnamon," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad always said it was a secret ingredient, something that made it special." He looked at her with new eyes, seeing for the first time how his own features were mirrored in her face. "I craved it constantly when I was carrying you," Sarah replied softly. "I couldn't afford much, but I could afford cinnamon. When I gave you to Michael, I made him promise to always add it to your hot chocolate. It was my way of staying connected to you, of giving you something of me." The distance between them, physical and emotional, seemed insurmountable for a moment. Then Nathan stood, walked around the counter, and did something that surprised them both. He hugged her. Sarah broke down completely, holding her son properly for the first time since he was a baby. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to keep you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from all of this. I'm sorry I let Gregory control our lives for so long." Nathan held her tighter, his own tears falling silently. Marcus appeared at the Harrison mansion on a rainy evening, soaked and shaking, his face pale with the weight of his conscience. Nathan found him standing in the foyer, water dripping onto the marble floor, looking nothing like the confident boy who had once been his best friend. "I need to tell you everything," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "About that night, about Gregory, about why I betrayed you." Nathan led him to the library, where Richard and Sarah joined them, silent witnesses to this moment of truth. Marcus revealed how Gregory had approached his parents months before Michael's death, offering to forgive their massive debt in exchange for their cooperation. "He wanted me to be his eyes and ears," Marcus confessed, "to report everything about your dad's movements, your conversations at home, everything." The night of Michael's death hadn't been a coincidence. Gregory had orchestrated every detail, including Marcus staying over. "They told me you needed to be seen as the prime suspect," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I was supposed to discover the body with you to make it look suspicious. I didn't know they were going to kill him. I swear, Nathan, I didn't know." His voice broke as he described the guilt that had eaten at him for months. "Every time I saw you on the streets, every time I heard people calling you a monster, I wanted to scream the truth. But they threatened my family. They said they'd do to my parents what they did to your dad." Nathan sat in silence, absorbing every word, while Sarah gripped his hand supportively. Richard stood by the window, his face grim as he listened to another example of his father's manipulation of innocent lives. Marcus appeared at the Harrison mansion one stormy night, drenched and shaking, his once confident demeanor shattered by the weight of his guilt. He stood in the foyer, water pooling at his feet, looking lost and broken, a far cry from the boy who had once been Nathan's best friend. "I have to tell you everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About that night, about Gregory, about why I did what I did." Nathan led him to the library, where Richard and Sarah gathered silently, witnesses to this moment of truth. The story spilled out of Marcus in broken fragments. Gregory had approached his parents months before Michael's death, offering to forgive their massive debt in exchange for their cooperation. "He owned my family," Marcus confessed, tears streaming down his face. "Every move I made, every word I spoke to you, he controlled it all." The night of Michael's death had been meticulously planned. Marcus's sleepover wasn't coincidental, it was orchestrated. "They told me you needed to be the prime suspect," he said, his voice cracking. "I was supposed to discover the body with you, to make it look suspicious. But I swear, Nathan, I didn't know they were going to kill him. I thought it was just about pressure, about the loans." His role had been carefully scripted from his initial shocked reaction to his accusation of Nathan. Gregory's people had coached him on exactly what to say, how to act, even where to stand when he called the police. "Every word was planned," Marcus admitted, "designed to destroy your credibility before you could even defend yourself." The guilt had eaten at him for months. "Every time I saw you on the streets, every time I heard people calling you a monster, I wanted to scream the truth," he sobbed. "But they had photos of my little sister at school, of my mom at work. They made it clear what would happen if I spoke up." Nathan sat in silence, absorbing every word, while Sarah gripped his hand supportively. Richard stood by the window, his face grim as he listened to another example of his father's manipulation of innocent lives. The rain outside seemed to echo the tears falling freely down Marcus's face. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Marcus concluded, looking directly at Nathan for the first time. "But you deserve to know the truth. Your father, he was a good man, and you were my best friend. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." The evidence against Gregory Harrison surfaced like a dark tide after his death, each new discovery revealing deeper layers of corruption. In his study, behind the carefully maintained facade of legitimate business, investigators found a labyrinth of criminal documentation spanning 3 decades. Filing cabinets yielded thousands of loan agreements with impossibly predatory terms, each one a story of calculated destruction. Detective Carter's team discovered a sophisticated surveillance system hidden within the mansion's walls. Hard drives contained countless hours of footage, meetings with desperate borrowers, conversations with corrupt officials, and most disturbingly, recordings of Gregory watching his victims' lives unravel from afar. One video showed him calmly observing Nathan sleeping on the streets, knowing it was his own grandson suffering. The most damning evidence came from Gregory's private safe, accessed only after his death. Inside, meticulously organized folders documented every crime, blackmail schemes, orchestrated accidents, and carefully planned murders. Each victim's file contained photographs, financial records, and Gregory's handwritten notes detailing their pressure points, family members, medical conditions, personal weaknesses he could exploit. James Morton, Gregory's longtime chemist, provided crucial testimony about the poison laboratory hidden beneath the mansion. Here, Morton had developed untraceable compounds for Gregory's special cases borrowers who couldn't be silenced through conventional means. The lab logs showed the exact formula used to kill Michael Williams, with Gregory's initials approving its use. Financial records revealed a vast network of corruption. Offshore accounts linked Gregory to paid enforcers, corrupt officials, and a web of shell companies used to launder money. Each transaction told a story of suffering families displaced, businesses destroyed, lives ended. The Harrison Empire had been built on a foundation of thousands of shattered dreams. Perhaps most chilling were Gregory's personal journals, documenting his thoughts as he orchestrated these crimes. His entries revealed a man who viewed human lives as mere commodities, measuring their worth solely by their utility to his empire. The final entries showed his growing obsession with Nathan, as he struggled with the knowledge that he had destroyed his own grandson's life. The evidence also exposed Gregory's manipulation of Marcus and his family. Detailed records showed how he had exploited their financial vulnerability, using their debt to force Marcus into betraying his best friend. The psychological warfare was documented in cold, clinical terms, with Gregory noting how to best use a child's loyalty against them. The connection between Michael's death and Gregory emerged with chilling clarity through a series of recovered documents and testimonies. A leather-bound ledger found in Gregory's safe detailed the systematic destruction of Michael Williams, planned with the same precision as a hostile corporate takeover. It began 3 years before Michael's death, when he first approached Harrison Investments for a loan to cover Nathan's medical bills. Gregory, recognizing Michael's vulnerability as a single father, personally approved the loan with deliberately predatory terms. The ledger contained notations in Gregory's distinctive handwriting. Williams' potential leverage through son. Proceed with standard escalation. Email exchanges between Gregory and his network of enforcers revealed a carefully orchestrated campaign of pressure. Michael's loan payments were deliberately misprocessed, creating false late fees. His credit was systematically destroyed through manufactured defaults. Anonymous complaints were filed with the school board, threatening his teaching position. The most damning evidence came from James Morton, Gregory's chemist, who broke his silence after Gregory's death. Morton detailed how he had developed the untraceable poison specifically for Michael, designed to mimic natural heart failure. Gregory had insisted on a formula that would ensure a painful death, his final act of cruelty against a man who had dared to challenge his authority. Security camera footage from Michael's last day, recovered from Gregory's private files, showed the methodology of the murder. A Harrison investment collector had visited Michael at school, delivering an ultimatum along with a bottled water. The footage showed Michael, desperate and defeated, drinking from the bottle, unknowingly sealing his fate. Gregory's personal journal entries revealed an obsession with Michael that went beyond mere business. He had viewed the teacher's moral stand against his interest rates as a personal affront. Williams thinks his integrity makes him strong. One entry read, "I'll show him how quickly principles crumble when a father fears for his son." The most shocking revelation came from Gregory's final records. He had discovered Sarah's connection to Nathan just weeks before ordering Michael's death, but proceeded anyway, knowingly orchestrating the murder of his own grandson's adoptive father. His notes showed no remorse, only cold calculations about maintaining control. The police investigation's final report landed on Richard's desk like a bomb, its contents exposing the full scope of Gregory Harrison's criminal empire. Detective Carter's thorough investigation had uncovered a network of corruption that spanned decades and implicated dozens of prominent community figures. The findings vindicated Nathan completely. Forensic evidence proved conclusively that Michael's death was murder, not natural causes. The toxicology report matched the poison to samples found in Gregory's private laboratory, establishing a direct link between the Harrison empire and Michael's death. The official record was amended, clearing Nathan's name of any suspicion. Multiple arrests followed as the investigation widened. Corrupt police officials who had buried evidence, judges who had approved fraudulent foreclosures, and business associates who had helped launder money all faced criminal charges. The web of complicity Gregory had woven began to unravel, taking down powerful figures across the city. The investigation revealed that Gregory's death itself was likely suicide, using the same poison he had employed against Michael. His final act appeared to be one of calculated defiance, denying his victims the satisfaction of seeing him brought to justice. A letter found in his safe, addressed to Richard, contained just 2 words: "You win." Perhaps most significant were the files documenting Gregory's surveillance of Nathan after Michael's death. Photographs showed the boy sleeping on streets, searching for food in dumpsters, all while Gregory watched from his luxury car, knowing this was his own grandson suffering. The revelation of this calculated cruelty shocked even the most hardened investigators. But Detective Carter's concluding remarks noted that the Harrison case would redefine how law enforcement approached white-collar crime, serving as a reminder that financial crimes had human victims just as surely as violent ones. The report ended with a personal note: justice delayed is still justice. Nathan Williams can finally sleep in peace. The community's reconciliation with Nathan began on a sunny Saturday morning in the town square. Hundreds of people gathered, many holding signs that read, "We're sorry, Nathan and justice for Michael Williams." The same faces that had once shown contempt now reflected shame and regret. Pastor Roberts, who had once shunned Nathan from his congregation, spoke first. "We failed you," he said, his voice breaking. "We let fear and prejudice blind us to the truth. We condemned an innocent child who needed our support most." The crowd murmured in agreement, many wiping tears from their eyes. Mrs. Anderson, the baker who had pulled her grandchildren away from Nathan, approached him with a trembling batch of his favorite cookies, the same ones she used to bring at Christmas. "Your father was one of the kindest men I knew," she said softly. "I dishonored his memory by treating you the way I did." The school board held a special assembly, officially expunging any negative records from Nathan's file. His father's classroom was renamed the Michael Williams Memorial Classroom, and a scholarship was established in his name for students facing financial hardship. Teachers who had once turned their backs now lined up to share stories of Michael's kindness and integrity. Mr. Thompson, the grocer who had refused to serve Nathan, invited him to reopen the store together. He had placed a large photograph of Michael by the entrance, with a plaque reading "In memory of a true friend and teacher." The simple gesture spoke volumes about the community's desire to make amends. The local newspaper printed a front-page apology, accompanied by a detailed account of Gregory's crimes and the community's misplaced judgment. They established a regular column dedicated to exposing financial predators and supporting their victims, ensuring that no other family would suffer as the Williams had. Even the basketball court where Nathan had been bullied was transformed. Local kids organized a memorial tournament in Michael's honor, with proceeds going to help families struggling with predatory loans. Nathan was asked to throw the first ball, surrounded by cheering supporters instead of tormentors. The transformation wasn't just about public gestures. People began sharing their own stories of Gregory's manipulation, creating a support network for all his victims. The community that had once been divided by fear was now united in healing, with Nathan's story at its heart. The adoption ceremony took place in Judge Anderson's chambers, a space transformed from its usual formality by the warmth of the occasion. Richard and Nathan stood side by side, their matching blue ties a deliberate choice that spoke of their journey from strangers to family. Sarah watched from nearby, her eyes glistening with tears of joy rather than sorrow for the first time in years. Today, Judge Anderson began, "We're not just formalizing a legal arrangement. We're celebrating the triumph of love over darkness, of choice over blood." He looked directly at Richard, who had spent months working to transform Harrison Investments into a force for good in the community. The adoption papers lay before them, each page representing a step away from Gregory's legacy of destruction and toward a new kind of Harrison family. Richard's hand was steady as he signed, his signature marking not just a legal commitment but a moral one. "I promise," he said, looking at Nathan, "to be the kind of father you deserve." Nathan's signature followed, his hand trembling slightly with emotion. This wasn't replacing Michael, they had made that clear in their conversations. This was adding to his family, honoring his father's memory by accepting love where he found it. "Dad would have liked this," he said softly, touching the worn watch he still wore, Michael's last gift to him. Sarah stepped forward to sign as a witness, her role as Nathan's birth mother now acknowledged openly. The three of them had crafted a unique family dynamic, one based on honesty and healing rather than obligation and secrets. Richard had insisted that Sarah move from the servants' quarters to her own suite in the mansion, recognizing her not as staff but as family. Detective Carter, who had helped uncover the truth about Michael's death, served as the second witness. His presence represented justice served, closing one chapter of their lives as they began another. He had become a frequent visitor to the mansion, helping Richard establish a foundation to assist victims of financial predators. After the final signatures were in place, Judge Anderson made it official: by the power vested in me, I hereby declare Nathan Williams legally adopted by Richard Harrison, with all the rights and responsibilities thereof. He smiled warmly, adding, though it seems to me you've been father and son in all the ways that matter for some time now. The small celebration that followed in the mansion's garden was intimate but joyful. Sarah had prepared Nathan's favorite foods, including the cinnamon hot chocolate that had become a symbol of their reconnection. The piano in the music room had been moved outside, and Nathan played some of Michael's favorite songs, his music floating through the evening air. Richard presented Nathan with a gift: a new leather-bound journal. Inside the cover, he had written, some legacies are chosen, not inherited. Write your own story. It was an acknowledgement of their shared determination to transform the Harrison name into something worthy of pride. The Michael Williams Memorial Foundation was launched on what would have been Michael's 50th birthday, transforming the Harrison Mansion's grand ballroom into a beacon of hope. Richard, Nathan, and Sarah stood together as they unveiled the foundation's mission to combat predatory lending and provide educational opportunities for underprivileged students. The foundation's first act was dramatic, using Richard's personal fortune to forgive millions in predatory loans that Gregory had issued. Each forgiven debt came with a copy of Michael's favorite book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and a handwritten note about standing up for what's right. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, Michael's teachings continuing to change lives even after his death. The education became the foundation's cornerstone. Full scholarships were established at local colleges, specifically targeting students whose families had been victims of financial predators. The selection committee, led by Sarah, prioritized candidates who embodied Michael's values of integrity and compassion. Nathan took a personal role in the foundation's mentorship program, working with children who had lost parents to tragedy or injustice. His own journey from loss to healing made him uniquely qualified to guide others through their darkness. Each week he taught piano lessons in the mansion's music room, continuing his father's legacy of nurturing young minds. The foundation transformed Gregory's old office into a free legal clinic, where victims of financial abuse could find representation and support. Richard personally recruited ethical lawyers who shared their vision of justice, ensuring that no one would face financial predators alone again. During the foundation's first year, Sarah established the Teachers Making a Difference grant program, providing funding for educators going above and beyond for their students, just as Michael had done. The first recipient was Ms. Reynolds, Nathan's former tutor, who had started a program for homeless students. If this story of redemption, justice, and healing has touched your heart, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective on Nathan's journey from tragedy to triumph could inspire others facing similar challenges. Every subscription to our channel helps us continue creating meaningful stories that explore the depths of human resilience and the power of forgiveness. If you believe in the message of hope this story carries, please like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can spread these stories of transformation to those who need them most. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.